I remember when I really first started to understand the negative effects of alcohol. Hi, my name is Dr. Jamila Banks, and I am your licensed holistic marriage and family therapist who specializes in trauma-informed care, anxiety, depression, and suicide management and reduction. And I remember when I first started to really understand the effects of alcohol. I was in second, third, fourth, and fifth grade, and the neighbor across the street had two different personalities, it seemed. It was one personality where she was nice and she was sweet and she was coherent, and it seemed like she was a good mother and she was very helpful. And then there was a side where she was loud and she was cussing and she was screaming and she was belligerent. And I started to notice over the years how these sides would play out. There would be sometimes I would go across the street to walk to school with her daughter and her son, who are around my age, and they would let me in, and mom would be cooking breakfast and they would be getting ready and everything would seem okay. There were some days when I went across the street and they would not let me in the house, and I would hear mom behind the door cussing, screaming, yelling at them. And when they came out, they kind of look a little dirty, they kind of look a little scared, and their attitudes and moods were different. It was some days when we would come home from school and the mom would let me in, and we would do our homework and we would have snacks and we would play, and her older daughter used to babysit us. It was some days when I came to the house after school and I had to go across the street and I could not come in, and then I would hear her yelling and screaming and just being loud for the rest of the afternoon. There are some weekends when we woke up and we went outside and then we played, or we would start doing our errands, and she would come across the street and talk and be coherent and nice and warm and friendly. There were some days when we woke up and we went outside, and early in the morning the music was blasting and you could hear her singing, cussing, yelling, and she would come out stumbling and she would smell and she would not look put together. And this is what I was seeing year after year after year. And I didn't quite understand. My mom was always friendly to her, respectful to her, until one night when we were coming home and she stumbled across the street and she must have said the wrong thing at the wrong time at the right time to my mom. And it was the first time I actually saw my mom get into a fist fight. And my mom soon after told me that she struggled with alcohol and that she was not well, and that, just to make sure if I was over there and I was around the kids, just to make sure I was safe and secure and to always be mindful of everything. And I learned early on that people's personalities and their character and their demeanor could change depending on if they were drinking. And that it was okay, in moderation sometimes, and if you were still nice and polite and kind, and but if it was a point where you were drinking and you started to be mean and nasty and yelling and not kind, that was not good. So I learned early on the side effects that could happen with alcohol, and that taught me that there's a difference between drinking for pleasure, drinking for entertainment, or drinking for fun, and drinking to be drunk and out of your mind and belligerent.